Many of you know that I'm going through a total revamp of my entire bearing press system. You may also know how much I hate blind bearing pullers. But what you don't know is that there's a bearing extractor as part of the system. The design of the bearing extractor has three main goals. One, it has to have a hook-like grip on the back side of the bearing inner race. Two, it cannot damage that inner spacer that sits between the two bearings. And three, it has to have a claw-like grip on the bearing while you're extracting it. What we're looking at here is a BSB configuration. Bearing, spacer, bearing. This is common in hubs, free hubs, and suspension. Now, the extractor exploits this small crevice that sits between the bearing and the spacer. It's very small, so let's have a closer look. Let's chop it in half here, zoom way in, and you can see that this crevice right here is where the tool needs to fit. You want to be able to grab the back side of the bearing so that you have a secure hold on it and pull it out. Now this is very small. This inner ring right here is less than 2 millimeters tall, so this crevice is like 0.5 millimeter or 20,000ths of an inch small. So you don't want to make that lip too large either. If it pushes into the bearing spacer, you could damage the bearing spacer. Now, this bearing spacer isn't a dust cover, it's an actual functioning piece. It transmits an axial load of clamping, like your through axle. When you clamp your through axle, it transmits the load through this bearing inner ring into the bearing spacer and into the other bearing ring and off to the other side of your clamp. Works the same for suspension bolts. So this is a load bearing piece. You don't want to damage it. So if you're going to use a lip to grab the back side of this bearing, it needs to be very small and it needs to be accurately positioned. Well, my extractor is designed to get the lip all the way into that space, but no further. The design is based around expanding jaws that look like this. Here, if we zoom in, we can see the lip that fits behind the bearing, this tiny lip. Now, the rest of the jaw fits inside the bearing. So as you expand the jaws only expand until they touch the inside of the bearing. This allows me to use a very small lip and still grab the back side of the bearing very securely. Let's take a look at how the jaws grab onto the bearing. Tool fits in from the outside and then use an Allen key to tighten it up. So the jaws expanded until they hit the bearing inner ring. Now, this is very secure. The bearing is stuck onto the tool right now because the jaws are grabbing the bearing inner ring and they're locked onto the back. Notice that there isn't even any kind of retaining here on this side. Nothing is holding the bearing in position. Now we'll get back to that again later, but this is this stable without that. So it's got a great grasp. Part of that is because of the way the contact surface between the wedge and the jaws is designed. This surface right here that presses into the jaw stays in full contact all the time. So as you expand the jaws, everything stays nice and stable. And then as you apply force to remove the bearing, everything continues to be extremely stable. Okay, back to the lack of a stop here on this end. I was trying to design the tool to be as simple as possible, but it turns out that sticking the tool in and finding that gap between the spacer and the bearing is a little bit too finicky. So I'm going to have to put a stop on here, and so that you can just stick the tool in and just crank away at it. Now, I'm a big fan of pressing bearings out because it works with a controlled screwing motion. So currently the extractor works with the leveraging pieces in my system. I have acetal pieces for pressing against delicate surfaces like carbon frames, and I have aluminum leveraging pieces which are a little bit stronger and will handle thinner surfaces like on rocker arms and such like that. Hey Steve, what if I can't press it out because I don't have a nice flat surface to leverage against? Well, The tool is proving to be very stable on the bearing, so maybe I'll find a way to whack it out or jerk it out like a manufacturer recommends. How about a little demonstration? Here we have the ALT Extractor all assembled. We have a free hub. Insert the ALT Extractor into the free hub. Find the groove between the bearing and the spacer. Tighten the tool so the jaws expand. Grab a leveraging piece. Put it up against the free hub. Grab the stud stop. And then just tighten the extractor until the bearing comes out. Spacer comes out. There you go. Stay tuned.